to the InnerVerse. Fear is an illusion. InnerVerse Podcast.
Welcome to the One Within, all to another episode of the InnerVerse Podcast. I'm your host, Chance, grateful to connect once again with the most spiritually enlightened and intellectually activated audience across all the internet. Now, in all my studies of religion, mythology, and the spiritual connection these knowledge bases engender, I have found again and again that the deepest mystery of the universe is about the generative power itself. In the macrocosm, the age-old question is addressed again and again. Where did the world come from? Why is there something instead of nothing? How is our consciousness and divine spark related to whatever it is that creates and sustains our existence? While there may not ever be truly definitive answers to questions about that which is in itself infinite, what most of us call God and Goddess, in the microcosm, the incredible truth is that each and every human being ever to call this earth home was themselves brought into reality through the matrix of their mother. Even the labeling of this world as a matrix is an unconscious nod to this very fact that in all stages and phases of life, we're incubating a greater self, even unto that final frontier we call death, which sages through the ages assert as a rite of passage to yet another new life. With us today to contemplate these timeless, incredible questions is Maryn Green, founder of the Indie Birth Association, author of Indie Birth, a story of radical love, and host of the Taking Back Birth podcast. Throughout all these efforts, Maryn has done an incredible job inspiring and encouraging women, midwives, and husbands to reconnect with the true substance of femininity and the ancient folk knowledge tradition that guided wise women of all ages in their role as spiritual psychopomps and custodians of humanity's most sacred experience. Hailing from the peaceful shores of Hawaii, Maryn's life and teachings have been instrumental for undoing the damage done to the perception of birth as a medical emergency by the big machine in the 20th century and beyond, and the seeds of comfort and consciousness she's planted will surely provide shade for many of our own children in their future passage through the parenting portal. Check out the show notes for the links to all the information Maryn's got to offer, including indiebirth.org. And don't forget all the ways you can support InnerVerse will also be in the description too, including our favorite affiliate, Alchemist's Tippecanoe Herbs, where you can pick up some of the holistic health products like their excellent Baby Bump Tea that have been instrumental to enhancing my wife's pregnancy journey to its highest potential. And remember the InnerVerse coupon code for a discount when you check out at Tippecanoe. So with introductions out of the way, let's begin this transcendental talk with the matriarch of Indie Midwifery and supremely sapient mother of 10, Maryn Green. Welcome to InnerVerse, and thanks for coming on with me today.
Wow. Thank you, Chance. I think that was the most elaborate introduction I've ever gotten. So I feel really honored and really excited to be here. I'm used to being on birth podcasts and mothering podcasts, which I really, really love, but I'm very excited to speak with you and kind of expand the box with the kind of things you bring in.
Absolutely. Yeah. We got the audience here that's like the deep end folks. We don't have to baby around them.
Very good.
But introduce yourself to all the folks too. I'm sure that there's things that you could say about Maryn Green that I couldn't fit into that elaborate introduction.
Yeah, introductions are such a funny thing. I feel like I do a lot of them, and it just depends on the day. That's what I typically say. I'm a mother for sure to 10 beings that are here, and so that feels like the most prominent role lately. am a midwife as well, although I'm not actively attending births right now. I feel like I'm really on essentially some kind of, spiritual sabbatical that really happened without me planning it, without me knowing it a couple years ago. And it has led us here to this beautiful island of Oahu that is teaching us a lot of things and giving us the opportunity to receive from this land and, I don't know, take us wherever we're meant to go. So I think on some days here, I sort of have that existential, who am I question, what am I actually doing? It's happening here a whole lot more. So that's what comes today.
Oh, that's the question life's all about. Just keeping it in the forefront of our mind. That's the journey. So tell us about when and why you became a midwife.
Well, as I said, we have 10 children and the oldest is about to be 22. And she was born in a hospital, just like most babies in this country are, because we weren't aware of our options. And even though we were fairly educated people, the medicalized system of birth was just what is handed, that's what is handed to people. And we didn't really seek outside of that. So we got what we got, which was a beautiful baby, but a sort of traumatic experience. Nothing horrible by medicalized standards, actually, but it just left me wondering what else was out there. And I remember holding my new baby and just sort of zoning out and wondering, like, is that really what birth is? Was that really how it was supposed to be? And I knew deep within myself that that was not the truth. So moving through to the next pregnancy, which was about a year and a half later, we ended up choosing a home birth. And even that was a huge decision because we were on the trajectory again, somehow, right, to do the same thing, to go back to a hospital with some changes. And I had this really great experience where the doula we had hired, so a doula is someone that, doesn't provide clinical or medical care, but essentially is like a friend for women that are birthing, right? So we had hired this wonderful doula, and she came over for an appointment about a month before my son, our second baby, was due. And we were going through my birth plan. So a birth plan is pretty useful at a hospital. You're basically stating your preferences. It's really sad that women even have to do that, but that's what they do. And she went through my birth plan with me, and I just started crying because I wanted so many things that weren't going to be reasonable given the setting I was choosing, right? So she sat there and she looked at me and she said, if all of these things are really important to you, which it seems like they are, would you consider having a home birth? And here I am a month before my due date. So it was actually, it might have been even less. It might have been 3 weeks or even 2 weeks. It was a short amount of time. And so my husband and I quickly got on board just like that, as if it had been in our consciousness forever in some way. And we lived in Chicago at the time where midwifery was illegal. So we got all the underground, so to speak, midwife names and numbers and went about interviewing for the next week, finally chose a midwife. And I just really fell in love with her. I fell in love with the whole idea of it, that I would go to her house for the couple of appointments that I had. And, her dogs were running around. It was so personal. And I felt like she really, truly cared about me. And the birth was life-changing. It was an amazing home water birth. And when my son was born in the days following, I sat in that same way I had with my daughter, just nursing them in the rocking chair. But after his birth, I was totally fired up and inspired. And I was wondering, how can I do this? How can I help women have this kind of experience? So the rest is history. He just turned 20 a couple of days ago. Yeah. And I began a midwifery apprenticeship just a couple of months after. An apprenticeship is really intense. It's a old way of learning. So I found a midwife that would teach me. And I basically followed her and some other midwives around for 5 years, to every birth, every prenatal, every postpartum before I was ready to be a midwife myself. So that's how I got into it. And it's shifted and changed immensely over the years through the birth of my next 8 children. We've moved around the country. I've had a license. I've given it back. Like, there's so many little stories I could tell you about the route to midwifery and what that means, but I'll stop there.
Oh, that's great. It's really just seems, from my perspective, I mean, I'm not a woman, but I see how alive this birth magic makes women feel, like being a part of it, even just being a witness to it, going through it themselves. It's like they really step into their highest expression of who and what they are as a sole purpose. I love that. And you talked about the birth plan part, right? I want to discuss that a little more, because regardless of, the best intentions, not everyone's birth plan is going to be followed to the letter. It's, things change in the process. It's touch and go. And some people listening maybe are going to avoid the hospital even for their first time. Other people still will feel more comfortable to do that. Right? What makes mom feel most comfortable is still the right answer, even if it's not ideal. But talk to us about, practicing informed consent, how to honorably decline all the many offers the hospital might make to you. That's going to be applicable to people's experience with the medical establishment, whether or not it's a birth, right? And these are
definitely
important principles for life. I mean, it applies to everything, really. It's even with scare tactics, things are just an offer.
Exactly. Yeah, it is a business. So I think keeping that in mind, the hospital and medicalized birth is a business. It is a very profitable business. So, just for a moment, I want to say that I was there. I had my first baby in the hospital. So I don't judge where people are at. I think nowadays, especially, there's a lot of information out there. We'll probably get to some of it. Indie birth, we have a ton of it. So I feel like more than ever, there are resources to help people decide where they fit. And so I just want to be clear about that. The medicalized system isn't my choice, but it has value in the sense of just belief systems, right? So I believe that birth is a natural event. It's a rite of passage. It's sacred, even for most women, for most normal, healthy women. I believe that it doesn't need to be controlled because our bodies do know how to do it. And there's even science to support that as mammals, we have the recipe, so to speak, in our cells. And I believe babies deserve to be born in peace. However, the medicalized system just has a different set of beliefs. So I'm not saying they're wrong. They're just different. They believe that birth is generally a disaster, that women and babies need saving, that birth is a process that needs to be controlled. And so that's how they behave. It's also important to note that most doctors, most obstetricians have never been trained in normal birth, that they are trained as surgeons. So again, it's not bad or good. It's just, if you're the woman, if you're the pregnant woman or the partner, the way you make that choice really has to align with your own belief system, right? So that's the hardest part, is you wind up in a place or a setting where it doesn't align with you. That's what we want to avoid. So if someone really believes that birth is scary, then they can go where they want to go. They can also choose to work through that if they wish. But, I really see it that way now. And I don't believe everybody should have a home birth. So just kind of being clear about that first.
Now, I like that you brought up the way that hospitals treat the birth. And it kind of, to me, seems to come from maybe the fact that the medical establishment at the time where these principles were being put into place, largely male. And yes. I mean, I'm not pro male or pro female one over the other. I think we need both of our ways of being, but the male perspective is, let me fix it. I got to fix this. And it's not a thing to be fixed, right? Like, it's what I heard you say in a podcast was that a lot of times, even in the throes of the hardest part of the process, that the woman really just wants to be seen and witnessed, right?
Yeah,
not fixed.
Yeah. And, of course, it's such a nuanced conversation because I think we have to familiarize ourselves with what birth actually looks like and understand it. So there is this educational component of the way our bodies work. We have tons of our own client and our own births on our YouTube channel. So people that are like, what does birth actually look like? Like, what can it look like? Go and watch some. You've been warned, they're graphic birth videos. But until we see what it can look like and we either, resonate with that or something deep within us, especially women will say, I want that. Like my body understands that, even partners like, oh, wow. Like I didn't know it could be like that. I thought birth was scary or gross. And anyway, so I think we have to familiarize ourselves with that in this day and age. Most people have never been even close to a woman giving birth. So, what do we have? The movies and the sitcoms portraying the drama of birth and women screaming and in a hospital bed. So there's a lot of cultural fear is what I'm saying. There's so many rabbit holes we could go down. But getting familiar with what it can look like can really be helpful. And then again, people can choose to kind of do that work, well, how would I have a birth like that? And what comes up for me when I'm watching that, when I watch that baby come out and nobody is doing all the things, they're just allowing this baby to take its first breath on its own timetable. What kind of urgency, anxiety does that bring up in me? Because usually there are a lot of things there for most of us. So getting back to physiological birth, which is the way birth works just naturally as humans, is usually a process for most of us. It's not something that a lot of people just are like, oh yeah, I immediately identify with that. And I know that I can do that. It's a real work of art.
The great work. It's the greatest alchemical process ever.
Yes. And I believe that the baby soul, sometimes I don't call them babies, it's like, it's a soul. It just happens to be in a baby body. These are very highly evolved souls that, we grow and care for in our own bodies and we become the portal for them. But they have their own desires. They have their own karmic paths and things and the soul they're here to be. So I know it's probably not out there for this podcast, but that's a huge part of the process I see a lot of women and families being with and working through, that the baby actually brings some of these desires to the table as to how they want to be born, where they want to be born. So it's more a matter of tuning into that and following that rather than, this intellectual decision-making process.
Oh, that's brilliant. You said tuning in. So I got to mention, I do a type of energy work on the side called biofield tuning, where we look for off-balance energy in the person's field that contains stuck memories, emotional repression, or limiting beliefs about themselves or life. And for a lot, these represent patterns of recurring experience for people. And a lot of times these patterns begin in the birth story, or sometimes when the mom was pregnant with them. So for example, a particular type of challenge that the mother had while carrying the person might start showing up in that person's life for them. And, for a while I thought it was hard for me because I thought this is kind of the mom's fault, but I don't want to ever make anybody the bad guy in the healing process. But now I've been lately thinking it could be that some of those challenges were really like soul contract challenges that the baby themselves or the soul of that baby brought into this existence. And it was more the mom reflecting the baby's future process rather than the baby being sort of victimized by the mom's shortcomings. Because the last thing we want to do is like freak out pregnant women that if they have a hard day or, they're not absolutely perfect while they're carrying, then you're going to screw up your child in a way that might be hard for them to fix, right? Can you comment on these things that I'm bringing up?
Yeah, I love that. And I believe, much like you hinted at, that each soul is a complete sovereign being. And that can be either really cool and fun to kind of sit with when you're pregnant, or it can feel like a lot. I think even when it comes down to things like miscarriage, for example, there is a lot of blame and shame that women carry around a topic like that. And I believe that each soul is orchestrating their own existence as best they know how. And it's tricky because when we're women and we have babies growing in our bodies, yes, we are responsible. Yes, it matters what we eat. Yes, we influence it. But at the end of the day, or the end of the birth, that soul is going to get what they need. And so, that does bring up the topic of like, what happens when birth isn't perfect? Why can't we control birth? Why did I work so hard for this kind of birth and I didn't have it? And like you said, I think we have to be really mindful of the shame and blame, even the internal shame, blame, and guilt, that we're just not responsible for what another soul chooses. And that can be really difficult because we just live in a culture where, and I've had women say to me, like, I did all the things, I checked all the boxes, and this was not what I expected, and I have such compassion for that because I've also experienced that. And without not affirming the truth in that for them, I also believe that the baby coming, the soul coming, has a way of shaping the mother that we need to be for them, and probably even the partnership that we need to be for them. So I think it's a really great way to explain the mystery in a simple sense, right? That we have only so much control over any initiation, really. And birth is a major life initiation, and it is so largely a mystery. So for all we think we know, we don't.
I think I can boil it down. Like any philosophical concept requires a foundational belief. And I think the ground of spirituality is in free will. So despite the complexities of life and how it might not seem like it from our perspective, somehow across the spectrum of all of the interactions of people's choices in their physical life, at the root of that, every soul's free will has been honored, which it can be tricky because some people don't want to hear that where they're at in their current struggle, but it's the ultimate philosophy to reclaim personal responsibility and reject victimhood, which is the disempowerment plaguing the Western societies because of how it's been turned into a currency. Yeah. So I love your perspective here. This fits.
Yeah, I agree. I think people don't always want to hear it. And, it's hard for me to take. I'm sure it's hard for you to take sometimes. And it's, again, not a matter of blame. And, people are like, well, why would anyone choose that X, Y, or Z? I have no idea. I'm not the Great Spirit. I'm not God. I have no idea what someone's entire path looks like or even a part of it. And even in working with women, that's been really humbling because I think when you start as a midwife, you really do have this hope in a sense that, everybody will have the birth they want. And with your help, you're guiding them and you kind of come in your own brain that there must be a recipe. Like you really want to believe there is one. So I think there are things, like I said, that are super helpful, that are worth paying attention to. There's so many emotional, mental, spiritual things that arise in the body, even from our ancestry, that might be asking for us to look at or to be cleared or whatever. But we just can't look at it as like, if I do all the things, I will get what I want. I think there is that letting go. That's the hardest part, that surrender as we go into the birth process. Just like there is many times in life where we hold that vibration, we hold that end feeling, but we allow the baby and the universe to take its course. And again, in birth, I think that's just so important because there is this other soul. We are dealing with another outside of ourselves. So, it goes against, I think, a lot of the teachings out there, medicalized and even in midwifery, and how we go about getting what we want.
Yeah, especially with something so important when our desires don't fully come to fruition, it can be painful to accept. But if we ever feel our free will has been after the fact, we feel that we didn't get what we wanted. We need to just look deeper. Like, why did I need this? Or you need time to see why. But there will be answers. You just got to keep on going. But as I alluded to in the beginning of the show, and the mystery of the generative power, my favorite of all mysteries, I was wondering if you had any insight about what the science trademark pretends to know about conception and birth that in reality may still be a mystery or has just been labeled as an explanation rather than truly comprehended.
So many things. I'll do a quick plug for our Sacred Birth program, sacredbirthcertificate.org. And we have, I think, 14 women wisdom keepers from around the world that speak to some of these mysteries and what they were taught or what they learned in different traditions. Some of them are elders. So that's fascinating. And that already goes against what science thinks. In my own work and in my own life, I have felt the same. I have questioned so much of the process. And even something like conception, I mean, that's a great place to start. I think at the root, it's energetic, of course. And there's a lot we don't understand about how a baby gets made. There's so much we don't understand, but science really wants to tell us that, it happens like this and on this day. And I would guess that probably none of that is true, but I think so much of what we're told is false. I think especially now, there's something that's really shifted, obviously, right, in the consciousness since 2020. And there's a lot more challenges for a lot of women, I know, in getting pregnant and kind of being with some of these concepts, and forcing them to really look into and feel into what are the other possibilities? What are the other possibilities of what this could be? And how easy is it to let go of some of the science, if that's not serving? And I think for a lot of people, it's not, that it's a greater mystery. And yeah, essentially is just based on vibration and what these incoming souls are looking for, which I can't pretend to know. I have no idea, but I know that they are being very specific about a lot of things. So that's been really interesting to witness and even experience too.
Is it true that there's like a flash of light when sperm meets egg? Is the biology of the individual sperm particles and eggs interacting, is that fully accurate, or is there something more mystical in the essence of all this?
Yeah, definitely something more mystical. I was taught by one of my elders that the egg is the creative force. Obviously that's what's going to grow into this person, but the sperm is the intention, is often the set of beliefs. So that's one way to look at it. As far as like how it actually goes down, I don't know. I mean, I've thought all kinds of things in my head, even that conception always happens. Like if given the opportunity, of sperm and egg meeting, or even these two partners, these two divine partners meeting, that conception is something that always happens. That maybe it's implantation that's really kind of up in the air, right? Because we have that delay. Like conception probably happens, sort of immediately right after ovulation. And then we have like that whole week before there would be implantation. So I've just been wondering, like, what happens in that week? What happens with maybe how the dad of this being grounds his own energy? What is he experiencing in that week? And what is the requirement of the female during that time? I'm just wondering, like, when does the soul make that choice? And I think that's also not quite what they tell us. I don't know, though. It's all just up for debate.
Yeah, that's the worst thing about the scientism religion, is how things are explained away or relegated to experts, where the mystery of it is so much more potent to helping us recognize that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And you're asking about like what the father goes through or whatever. I had, my wife and I had a miscarriage last year, actually. And it was our first time being pregnant, either of us. I wasn't pregnant, but my first time causing pregnancy. And so we were not in the best frame of preparation. It was unintentional. So in terms of like how much material of mine meets material of hers is not the same as if it was on purpose, right? So about 8 weeks after she was pregnant, we lost that one. And it was very sad and very hard. I had a lot of like personal guilt over maybe I led her to do some activities that were too strenuous or, but we worked through it and wound up earlier this year, this February, I think it was February, January. That sounds right. I had a dream one night. I had a dream of having a little girl who's maybe 1 year old, just big enough to walk, little blonde girl who was getting kind of like dropped and beat up and all kinds of rough treatment. And I thought, oh no. But in the dream, every time something would happen to her, she would just laugh and be completely unharmed. And so I got this image in my mind from the dream of having a resilient, invincible baby that she was like the baby from the movie The Incredibles, right? So I tell my wife about this dream, and then she gets pregnant. I don't know if I told her about the dream or she did the pregnancy test first, but the very day that I had this dream or woke up from it, she has the intuition to take a pregnancy test and she's pregnant. So our baby announced herself and gave us the message we needed to feel comfortable about going through pregnancy again after her miscarriage, which was hard. So that's the kind of thing that is not really in the medical literature, the mystical nature of this soul that chose you, this is happening. I think it's the same baby in both pregnancies too, or the same being. It's gotta be. I think the first one was just for us to get ready, get my wife to leave her job, start learning about motherhood, start taking that as her primary role. And so it's been night and day, the difference between this pregnancy and the first one. But I've shared that story before, but I always got to share it when I'm on this topic because it's like incredibly magical. I feel so grateful that I got that message. It made the whole last several months way easier. Every time there's like a little wobble of fear or uncertainty, I just remember, we got the Incredibles baby though. Yeah. And it turns out she's a girl too. Like everything about that was accurate.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so beautiful. And yeah, that's really interesting. And I think when loss is the first pregnancy, that wasn't my experience, but I've worked with a lot of women where that has been, that's just different. Loss at any point is hard, but it just has a uniqueness about it. So I'm glad you guys are able to go on and connect with the soul. And they're not always the same souls, of course, that come back. So that's really cool. If that's the way you feel, I totally believe it. And the message that you shared about, not being ready, I think there's something so great about that. And like I said earlier, I don't see miscarriage as a shame or blame thing, even though it's a really normal part of the process to question, what did I do? What could I have done better? It's just what we do.
We found out that there were so many more women that have had that happen than we knew because it's like kept secret. But once we had it happen, people came out of the woodworks to tell us about their story. And I was like, I had no idea that this was so frequent. I just didn't know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know. I could speak for hours on that, but we just did a miscarriage masterclass a couple of days ago for anybody. Actually, it wasn't to train midwives. It was for any woman that wanted to know more to be able to support, the next woman she came in contact with, her sister, her friend, her daughter, whatever, because it's totally a topic that has been swept under the rug, but is super common. And there's so much power in it too, in its own way, to walk that road together separately and, have been with death before you have the chance to be with birth. It's a real growing up, I think, that can happen there. Not that I'm glad anyone experiences that, I'm not, but it is part of life sometimes. Yeah,
it happens. And, that's something we'll have to circle back around to, that threshold between life and death and birth and life is the same doorway.
Yep.
But before we go there, I wanted to ask about, so I met, like, we knew that we were having a daughter from this dream, and I was sure the whole time, but we practiced a couple old wives' tales about how to determine the baby's gender, like the ring test, like the pendulum test, and Chinese astrology.
Oh, right.
Based on conception date. All of that was accurate. So
cool.
I was wanting to ask you, having been so experienced with this subject, if there were old wives' tales about pregnancy that, you found to be credible or true, worth spreading,
I don't
they
know.
call it old wives' tales, like to throw it under the bus, but
right. Well, true. And I think there's always a grain of truth to anything like that. And across cultures, I mean, there's so many, and I'm not even familiar with probably half of them, right? Just different beliefs around what to do and what not to do. Again, I think those probably came from somewhere. And I think there's always just been superstition too around the mystery of pregnancy and birth, because until very recently, nobody could see in there. Nobody could really know anything past what their dreams told them, or, what a granny midwife had passed down as far as knowledge of what to do or not. So, yeah, I think there's truth, but I think consulting within is usually the best way I know how. And to be honest, out of my 10 children, I was correct about their sex, 8 of them. And the last 2 totally had me changed around. And I'm totally okay with having been wrong. It was actually really fun to have them come out and, be a surprise. On the other hand, I think it sort of sounds like an excuse, but whatever, that these souls are just sort of without a box in a lot of ways, and so we can feel the essence of the soul while they're in there often, especially as the mom, and our brain wants to assign that, male or female. And I think sometimes it just isn't that way where they come from. So my daughter that I thought was a boy, for example, like, she's super strong and tough. Like, this is the fastest, strongest 5-year-old you'll ever see. So, it's like there was definitely like that element of masculine energy that I picked up on. And my son, sort of the opposite. He's almost 4 and he's still nursing and hanging on me every second. And he's just like a real love. So I think the babies tell us what they want to tell us. And sometimes they do. And sometimes they want to be tricky and fun and make it a nice surprise for us, which I think is so great. There's not that many surprises in life like that. So I've welcomed those things.
I applaud people that can go the whole term without finding out, at least finding out. There's a lot of kind of like scary things people say about having ultrasound or imaging done. Do you think that that's the worst thing in the world, or do you think it's something to minimize, or like where are your thoughts there?
So to be transparent, I did have ultrasounds my first pregnancy, and I did know she was a girl. So her aside, and again, I was just sort of in the matrix, not really questioning things. I think it's ultimately a nuanced conversation. I tend to work with the belief, especially when I'm working with women, that they are the center of their experience. I like to use even the spiral. I love the spiral as a symbol, that she is the center of her spiral. And as a powerful woman living in this world, being pregnant, that all of the resources are on the table. I don't believe that technology is inherently bad. We can use it when we want it, and that's our right. So I think there is sort of this belief system in the natural birth world that is all bad and no one should ever do it. And how could that possibly be true? Because each woman needs to tune in with what's right for her. And for example, if an ultrasound is going to give her peace of mind and stop her adrenaline racing every day of the week until she has, real confirmation that this baby is alive, especially after a miscarriage, I think weighing that stress is something that is important. It's not black or white. On the other hand, more in the medicalized model where it's just routine. So every time the woman goes in for an appointment, ka-ching, they want to charge for the ultrasound for no reason. There's nothing to see. We already saw it. What are we looking at? She's not bleeding. There's no problem. Yes, there is overuse of ultrasound, and there are probably and have been shown to be drawbacks for developing babies for sure. So I like to have, and this kind of circles back to a question you asked and I did not answer, informed choice. I actually don't call it informed consent because I don't assume anybody is going to consent and I don't need them to. But informed choice means we have a conversation about what we know the benefits and risks to be.
So once you're informed, you're probably going to decline a lot more than you consent.
Well, yeah. I mean, consent is so assuming that I'm going to tell you and you're going to say yes. And as an unlicensed midwife, especially, I don't have any skin in the game, really. If I see something that, seems dangerous or my intuition speaks, I, of course, would share that with the woman I'm working with. But I have no need for someone to agree to an ultrasound because I don't have anyone above me telling me that everybody needs an ultrasound. So a lot of midwives, especially if they're licensed, to work under rules and regulations. And so the women they work with essentially have to agree to a lot of the tests and procedures. So I'm not one of those midwives, and very few of my clients over the years really opt for any of it. But again, I really try my best to not frame it as like a judgment or a bad or good. I certainly have had women get ultrasounds over the years. And I always say, it's your body, it's your birth, and maybe I have a couple of good questions to ask if it sort of came to them as, oh, I think I'm just supposed to do this. Or, sometimes it's another family member like, oh, so-and-so needs to know that my baby is okay. It's like, oh, well, let's dig into that for a moment. Like, there is no rush. The ultrasound isn't in 5 minutes. Let's dig into this, like, how do you feel about that? And I think one potential drawback of routine ultrasound, for example, is just that it takes the mom away from a deeper connection, possibly. Again, because in the past that wasn't available to us. And, not bad or good. It just wasn't available to us until a certain time in history. So I think women learned how to be with that. And I think in some cases, not all, there's sort of an avoidance of that. And there's more like, is my baby okay? It's more a question that women are asking, and they're asking someone else to answer it. And I think inherently that is a problem. So, it's a choice to go outside of yourself. But if you're constantly going outside of yourself in a pregnancy, I can almost guarantee you that you'll be going outside of yourself for the birth, which again is a choice. But, it's one we make over time, and it kind of culminates in that greater choice of like, what is going to go down at the birth? What do I know inside of myself? What do I know about my baby? Because there are many times in birth scenarios where someone else, so maybe a doctor, midwife, will pull the, you're going to hurt your baby card if you don't do what I'm suggesting. So if a woman doesn't have the practice of going internally, it's so easy to be swayed because you're vulnerable. And of course, you don't want anything to happen to your baby. So, right? It's a slippery slope.
I like how everything circles back to the female intuition, which as much as it's lauded by cultural tropes, it's also still vastly underplayed in terms of the power of that intuition. And then most of all, and this really applies to everybody, not just pregnant women, but knowing that you're not broken. So I have clients come to me sometimes that have been doing like throwing everything in the kitchen sink at their health from the holistic angle, going to every type of energy worker type deal that they can possibly afford. Right. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a scattershot approach to different types of modalities that can be good. But when you're going into something from the perspective of, I need to fix myself, you're going to come out the other end unless you have the right practitioner that helps convince you that you're not broken, you're going to come back out the other end saying, I'm not quite there. I still need to fix something. So in all things, if we go in with the perspective of I'm doing this practice or I'm having this baby as an expression of my wholeness. So you still do the modality, you still do the healing work, but it's an expression of my wholeness, not seeking to fix my brokenness. And I think that, that should be the underlying philosophy for how we approach things that we feel like we need or we feel like would benefit us. You know what I mean? I think that's definitely a huge perspective for pregnancy.
Definitely. And I would say that that's something I also believe for myself. And in working with women over the years, I've said out loud, I love to look for what's right, and I think that's in direct opposition to the medicalized system. It's all about looking for what's wrong with your pregnancy. Like if they can't find something, they'll just keep looking. And I've had so many traumatized women come to me after that experience. So maybe it was their first baby, maybe it was their second baby, whatever. And now they're like in this environment and with this support that truly believes in them, because I would not work with anybody that I did not truly believe in. And it's all about reminding them of what you're saying, that this is a miracle, that your body absolutely knows what it's doing. And we are looking for all the proof that everything is going perfectly. And I'll tell you, over the years, I mean, it's very rare and it's nothing I'm doing per se. I also work with very healthy women, but it's very rare for something to come up that, needs medical attention. And when it does, it does. But otherwise, it is such a different experience for women to just be bathed in that, because that does carry over into the birth, no matter how hard a birth is, no matter how long it takes, to know that this is going just right. And I've said that so many times at so many labors, like, this is all right. This is going right. You're doing great. Your baby is doing great. We don't know when it will happen. I can't tell you that. But looking for that, reminding someone of the wholeness, because especially women and especially pregnant women, again, being so vulnerable, can just be so intimidated. It's so intimidating to be pregnant nowadays. 20 years ago, for me, 22 years ago, like there wasn't all of the internet and all the this and message boards. Like I do not envy pregnant women today. It's so overwhelming. And it's so easy to feel like you're doing it wrong because everybody wants to tell you how to do it. And, of course, if anybody really knew, they'd be, trillionaires, because there is no one way to do it. It's the way inside. We have to follow the way inside. That's all we got.
I love it. I love that. On the subject of how nerve-wracking it can be to be pregnant in today's cultural milieu, in our first pregnancy, we were not really changing a whole lot about our lifestyle in those first 8 weeks. We continued watching TV shows or movies in our downtime. And something I realized after the miscarriage, I think my instincts were telling me this even during the pregnancy, but it was that everything we watched, 9 out of 10 of the things that we watched, almost in every episode, there was something horrific or terrible about being a mother or about being pregnant, or that happens to a mother or that happens to a baby. And it was like when I reflected on it, I was like, this seems like beyond this seems like beyond an accident. This seems like fear programming. It seems intentional. These are things that were on Netflix and whatnot. So I don't have a subscription to that anymore, but I don't think I ever did. Actually, I think I was using my parents, but either way, it is like they take, it's like a perversion, a complete inversion of the truth of the matter, which is that pregnancy and birth is absolutely mystical and amazing and a sacred rite of passage. And I really wanted to get into this first part of the conversation. Something I'm sure you've talked about many times, but the psychedelic aspect for mother during the birth process, going to, crossing the veil of life and death, returning with your baby. Can you talk about what it's like in the anesthetized version of the process,
Yeah, definitely. And it plays into the conspiracy that you just described, which is let's continue to scare everyone and make women think that they are broken, because powerful women in masses would obviously change the world. And birth isn't the only way to be powerful, to feel powerful, to access that, but it is one of the ways. And so it's very obvious to me why the culture is the way it is.
And it's maybe the only universal one in terms of these ways.
Yeah, definitely. So it's women and their immense power. Like, you just do not mess with a woman that has like owned her birth experience, whatever that looks like, because it changes you, and when we talk about death and all of that, there is a death of self. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But the other part of that conspiracy is an attack on the family, and I think that's the other thing that they're going after. And I think we all know that. And that's the first place well, it's not the first, because obviously we have pregnancy, but, birth is a really powerful opportunity to seize that power away from the family. There's nothing like a family, a partner, the baby, the mother, maybe other kids that have witnessed this soul coming earthside in this peaceful, blissful way. It bonds all of those people hormonally, their nervous systems, right? Even as the midwife in the room, I feel that, I'm not part of that family, but I can feel that bond. So it's immensely powerful for people to experience birth. And if more people did, obviously the world would be a different place. But speaking more to, kind of like the psychedelic nature of birth, I mean, that's definitely a possibility. And in all of my 10 births, I feel like I have gotten the opportunity to experience that. And maybe some would call it orgasmic birth or painless birth. My 9th birth in particular was just sort of mind-blowing. And I had created the intention actually to experience it differently than the 7 before or 8 before. Not because anything had been wrong, but I just was like, why don't I try something else? Like, I wonder how it could be. And it was so different. And it was like super quick and smooth. And the baby kind of came out when everybody was outside of the room. So I was like yelling for them. In fact, the video is on our YouTube. That's called The Birth of Cove River. She's my 5-year-old. Anyway, I've had the opportunity to experience that. And then my next baby, my 10th baby, her brother, was excruciatingly painful. And I thought I was going to die. So, I think painting birth as orgasmic is beautiful and possible, but it doesn't have to happen that way for it to be life-changing. And I think for a lot of women, it can just be a really big experience that kind of like blows them open. And they're not even quite sure until the pieces land, which is a whole other topic. So, the baby comes out, the placenta comes out, and then what? Like, then we have this entire period after of the postpartum time of healing and of actual parenthood. So we continue to pick up the pieces through that. But in the birth process itself, the physical sensations kind of combined with what it can feel like spiritually and what you have access to is amazing. And I think in pregnancy, many of us have access to other realms and, just because we have this star being growing within us. So it gives us the ability to, I don't know, I've had all kinds of crazy things happen. And some women don't. Some women just have like completely straightforward, normal pregnancies. There's no judgment on it. It's just kind of what you're open to. But because the body is opening, because the womb is a portal, there's obviously the opportunity for a whole lot more to come through. And, how that looks, again, is different. How that feels. Women describe birth differently. I've had 10 babies and they felt different. So, it changes. But I've always loved the visual. And I don't know who said it first, but of going to the stars to get your baby and bringing them home. And that's what it feels like. That is what it feels like to me when I've really paid attention. because you kind of get to this point in the birth process where surrender is just really necessary. And it's such a weird thing because there's nothing you can do about it anyways, but it can sort of make it worse if you hold on. And I've, shared that with so many women that I've attended over the years when I can see it. And I don't talk a lot at births, but if I can see it and they're asking me like, oh my God, what do I do? I'm like, okay, you're there. Like you're at the gate, you're at the gate and it's your choice when you're going to walk through that. You can wait. You can keep doing what you're doing and you'll just keep doing that for as long as you want. But there's a point of intention where we actually, step through. And I'm sure that's physiologically when the body is open, when the cervix is probably open and the baby is getting ready to descend, which is a spiritual process all of its own. Pushing and all of this stuff we're taught by textbook. I don't know how much of that is true either, because the baby has to get itself ready in all of the ways that we don't even understand and make that decision as well to leave the womb. So it's just so beautiful and so mystical. I never get tired of it, obviously.
That is actually one thing that I can identify with psychedelics is that there are these, there's points in a trip. It's been a long time since I did any trips, but there's points where you're presented with kind of like a threshold where I've got to cross this threshold and trust that I'll eventually find my way back to where I was, but I'm leaving the known universe for a while. And you can resist that. And the longer you resist stepping through that, the more friction and turbulence you experience, the bad trip starts to happen because you're stuck. You're supposed to say yes, just say yes to it.
Yeah.
And sounds like birth definitely has an element like that going on. And then in terms of the ecstatic birth, one thing that I observe about modern social media, Instagram culture is how maybe it's not for the worst intentions always, but especially ladies, but really all men and women will like to paint a picture of what they're doing as it being the best version of that thing anybody ever saw. You know what I mean? Social media, they're putting an artificial sort of foot forward. And so there's, that especially for ladies can create a lot of shame around, well, my experience didn't look like that, So how is as we're closing up the first hour, can you talk a little bit about how the Indie Birth Society Association helps ladies through those kind of difficulties and just prepare them for life before, during, after pregnancy? Promote the good work you're doing out there.
Well, we do have an Instagram page that is still up. So Indie Birth is the name of the account, but we made a very conscious choice, or I should say I made a very conscious choice a couple of months ago to remove ourselves from social media for all the reasons that you stated. So I won't go on and on about that, but it has become unbearable. It has become unbearable for me to watch, and for us as a business essentially to be thrown in the ring with people that have no idea what they're talking about. No idea. Like you said, they had one baby and some good photos, and now suddenly the Instagram grid and they have a business where they're attending births as a midwife. The world has gone crazy. So, I have 20 years of experience. Margot, the co-founder of Indie Birth, she has more than a decade, and we are concerned about that, but all we can do is care about what we're doing, which is what you asked. So that is focusing more on the wisdom, the wisdom and the experience that we have. And I mentioned our Sacred Birth program, the wisdom and experience that our elders have or other women have, even if they're not in the birth world, so to speak. So we have women speaking on, astrology and the birth process, for example, in the Sacred Birth container, because now more than ever, it feels important to talk about birth because that's our passion. We're not going to get away from that, but something has got to give. There has got to be some expansion. So, it's why I'm so glad to be here with you today and sort of expand this little box we've been in, because birth wisdom is life wisdom. And we can't separate any of it, just sort of how we started. It's like we were all born, we all made it here. We all have reason to care about the way birth looks in our culture, whether we have children or not. I think there's many people that care. So as far as that goes, we're training doulas, we're training midwives, and again, we're just sort of opening it up for women in general that want to investigate some of these life mysteries and initiations, because birth is so important. But like I said, there's other ones, from the blood mysteries of menstrual bleeding to motherhood, right? It's not like birth is just this little thing that exists outside of all of the fullness of life, but at the same time, a really powerful birth experience will influence life and will influence all of those parts. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were asking, but.
Absolutely. No, that's great. It's such a big offering that you've got going there. And I know people personally have taken advantage of the wisdom either through your podcast or through the association. So we'll talk more in the second hour. I've got lots of questions, both mystical and practical. Really appreciate you sharing some time with me today, Maryn, and I hope everybody goes and checks out your website, especially mothers-to-be, mothers who are, and the papas who might want to learn a little bit more about what they got in store for them or what their wives are going through. So thanks a bunch. Looking forward to part 2. In the immortal words of the great Slick Dissident, give thanks and praise. What a cool conversation. I hope that in the probably zillion podcasts that Maryn has done, both her own and interviewed on other shows, that hopefully we captured some more esoteric elements of this whole thing. I think that is especially true in the second hour. The first hour maybe was a little more standard fare, but we got to set the groundwork. We got to get the foundations built. If you guys listening are new to the show or just need a reminder, the way that you can get part 2 of this talk is through my Patreon or through Rockfin or my YouTube channel membership. All of that stuff is going to be linked below in the show notes. And there's lots of amazing stuff in the archive beyond just this extended episode. Now, what did we talk about in part 2? Rejoice. Rejoice, friends, because I know that a lot of you out there are always hungry for the placenta gnosis. And we had a half hour of it in this talk. Wow. Yeah. So we talked about the spiritual and biological importance of the placenta, the hospital conspiracies around the placenta, the symbolism of the divine twin that is the placenta, the guardian angel protector, reclaiming the power and the healing potential of placentophagy. Also, the possibility of a secret placental transmission of ancestral wisdom. Wow, there's a lot there. So, I mean, if that doesn't get you across the threshold, buy a ticket to admission, I don't know what will. We also had 20 more minutes after that talking about PMA gravy, because you may not realize this, but midwives are licensed, which means they're agents of the state. And there's issues with that, no matter how well-intentioned they are. And so we talked about why Maryn gave her license back and leveraged the power of the PMA, how she even found out to do that. Because remember, she did this like 13, 14 years ago or something, a long time ago, over a decade ago, well before the cooties situation caused people to start looking for solution and remedy legally to be able to run their businesses, and found out about PMAs. I think that's really when it came into my radar, and people that I know, my circles, started talking about PMA. But Maryn's been doing it for a long time, and to her knowledge, is the first midwife to ever even do that in the States. So we talked about her inspiration there, why she wanted to, if she's going to do this thing, do it right rather than go underground like a lot of unlicensed midwives will do. And I think that it speaks to the quality of her character, that she really wants to take responsibility for what she's doing rather than put it off on a liability on the state. So that was great. There's so much in the PMA gravy that is applicable to life outside of birth. And I think the same goes for the conversation about the placenta. And then in the last 10 minutes or so, we talked about life after birth and her Mothering the Mother course, which sounds really cool. even as not a doula, I'm kind of, curious about taking a course like that myself to be able to give the best postpartum care that I can as a dad. There's so much more that we could have talked to her about. But I think that we got the best out of that 2 hours that we could have. I'm really excited about it. In particular, I want to let everybody know about my biofield tuning services and how the birth story, birth trauma, or pregnancy challenges really show up in your energy field and how we can reclaim our wholeness by recognizing that. But before, you jump in and get a session with me because you had a C-section and you want to work on it, I got to tell people something. I've noticed this in a couple of sessions lately where there are some situation going on with their health or with their past that the client wants to know if I'm going to find in their energy field. And what I've realized is that when you go into a session, and probably not just with me, but in biofield tuning generally, you go into a session with something that you are almost hiding from the practitioner because it's on your mind. And I ask you, what do you want to work on today? And you don't say it because you're like, haha, I wonder if you'll find it. You got to realize that constitutes like hiding. You're hiding it from me. And I can't do anything without your consent. So if you've got this thing in your mind, you're not sharing it, but you're intentionally holding on to it. It's not going to be like a magical party trick where I pull it out and I just remove that information from your head when you're not willingly disclosing it. So we can find all kinds of stuff you're not expecting to find, and it's legitimately there, and it's showing up in your energy field because you gave me permission to find that kind of stuff. But I just have to say that because it has come up once or twice where, at the end of the session, they're like, I'm surprised we didn't talk about my C-section. I'm like, well, were you thinking about that from the beginning? So, it is what it is. But overall, all the sessions have been great. Even when we don't work on that thing you were thinking of, we still can do good stuff for you in a session. But always be forthright with what is on your mind or what's going on in your body. When you work with any kind of psychic type of modality, you could call it. But yeah, my website for biofield tuning, that probably was the worst sales pitch ever. Like, here's why you're doing it wrong. But InnerVersePodcast.com/sound-healing. If you're curious about that. And there are a lot of ways that we can be, and it's kind of unique person to person, that our birth story can cause some conditioning for us. So we can look into that, if it's relevant, or just any other type of patterning going on in your mind and emotional bodies that could be rectified to restore your personal vitality, balance your mental, physical, emotional, spiritual energies. Very powerful stuff. And, at this point, most of my clients are having their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th session, which isn't that they're needing to come all the time, but they're just getting a lot out of it and they want to keep going. So, one can do great stuff for you, but I appreciate you guys out there that are coming back every 3, 6, 12 months and continuing the journey. Another thing I wanted to talk about is my Patreon, right? So since 2017, my Patreon has been at $5 a month that whole time. And since then, the content has really dramatically improved, and I'm doing much more of it. There's InnerVerse with the extended episodes. That's part of what you're getting with the Patreon. I'm doing Vibrants every week that I wasn't when I started the Patreon, and those are just plain free. I'm just giving that away. And after the one with John McHugh and Jason Quit last week, that's quite a gift. Thank you for the super chatters who fund that. That's really great. But since the price hasn't changed for my content, and I'm now doing Inner World at least once a month with Dylan, and that show has the most intensive research and preparation of anything I've ever done. That, along with the cost of living increases that have gone on since 2017, it just makes sense that I bring the Patreon cost up to $8 a month, which is in line with what the YouTube channel membership version costs. And Rockfin's $15. You get more with Rockfin because you get other people's channels too that have premium content on there. But I just think it's worth it, because why would Patreon be the cheapest one when it's the best bang for your buck? Because it's got the archive going all the way back to the beginning. And on top of that, I don't do ads. You notice that? I hope you noticed that. I can't stand it when a podcast I like has to just cut in right in the middle of somebody's sentence with, here's why you should switch to this internet service provider, or here's this other bullshit. How about some online gambling? You know, it's garbage. And I'm not judging the podcast hosts that do that. Got to make a living. I get it. But I'm not about to hold your attention hostage so that I can make a little more money. I'd rather just ask you to support the content. And if you're not, then I should just make better content. So working on making the best content I can. Raise the price from $5 to $8. Thank you to everybody that signed up since then and has stayed on since I made that switch. I know it's worth it. And I know you guys that are doing it know it's worth it. But if you haven't tried it out, give it a shot. You know, what's it going to hurt you to do 1 month? Throw me $8 for all this that we're giving you on this channel and help me pay my diaper bills that are coming very soon. I appreciate it. So there's all that. There's Typica New Herbs. InnerVerse coupon code for 10% off. All kinds of great medicine there. Many ways to support the podcast. Thank you all for being here. And thanks for listening to this really great conversation with Maryn Green. Check out the Indie Birth Association, named such because it's a private membership association. I think that is the coolest, very profound, very powerful. She totally gets it. And it was a pleasure and honor that I got to do this show, especially in the timing, divine timing for me, for sure. You guys be good out there. Love y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And until next time, sayonara.